Happy Tuesday and welcome to the New Talk for Moms of Black Boys. We are joined today by Dr. Rhonda Tsoi-A-Fatt. She is the founder and CEO of the Moriah Group. She has all of these wonderful subsets and organizations that fall under that. She's going to tell you guys a little bit about that when she does her introduction. I'm excited for this conversation. I'm excited for all of the things that come out of the Moriah Group. Forward Promise is the fellowship and for leaders. It is the entity that allows us to pour back into us, ourselves. The Pelcher Magruder, our founder, was a fellow for cohort 1. I have the pleasure of being a fellow for cohort 3, and it is just a phenomenal experience. Rhonda, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all that you do. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me, Kimberly. I'm excited to be here. I always love your energy and love anytime we're able to have a conversation. So I'm excited to be here today. And thank you to everybody that's tuning in and spending some time with us this evening. So yes, I'm Rhonda Tsoi-A-Fatt. I am founder and CEO of the Moriah Group. I tell people I'm a mama first. I have a 19-year-old son who's a sophomore in college and a 12-year-old daughter, a sixth grader. And they are my pride and joy, and a lot of the reason why I get up and I do this work every day, because in my kids, I see America's young people, particularly our Black young people. And when I think about the opportunities I want for my own children, they're the opportunities I want for all of our kids in the United States. And I work every day to make that happen. I created the Moriah Group nearly 10 years ago, after having done a lot of work both in government and in nonprofits to benefit our kids. I really wanted to shift my focus to something that was more unapologetic and to really speak truth about the ways that racism was impacting the lives of our young people and what we could do to stop it. Within the work of the Moriah Group, we talk about our work is all about thriving communities and thriving youth. That's what we focus on every day. What can we do to ensure that our Black communities are thriving, that our young people are thriving? And so, like you mentioned, there are a couple of initiatives that fall under that. The Forward Promise program, which is a fellowship, as well as the work that we do to fund nonprofits around the country. MOBB was actually one of our grantee organizations as well a couple of years ago. We also do a lot of work around training around this notion of dehumanization around the country under our Forward Promise work. We also have the Nafasi Fund, which is our fiscal sponsor entity for small organizations that need to be incubated and need some financial support as they're looking to launch their social justice work in whatever area that they are working in their communities. And then finally, our newest initiative that we were just chatting about earlier, which is our Ayoku Healing Retreat Center. And that is our work to ensure that there is a safe, sacred, and beautiful place for our people to assemble when we are focusing on our rest and reinvigoration, when we are working on issues of social justice every day.
Amen. You said a whole mouthful. Your work is so encouraging. The things that the thoughtfulness that goes into all of the initiatives you have, it oozes from you, from your staff, from the environments that you expose us to. It really is clear that you want the people around you to feel encapsulated by luxury and love and just an opportunity to truly just sit still. It really is an amazing experience. And if you have not checked out any one of these programs, I encourage you to visit the website and do so. But we're going to get into this conversation. Today's topic is dehumanization, mental health, and success within the Black community. Um, let's start out by really just defining what dehumanization is. Let's do that. Do that for us.
Okay. So we define dehumanization as this persistent invalidation of the humanity of people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And that manifests itself in people's thoughts, their ideas, and their behaviors and the actions that they take against people of color. So all of the ways that people show us that they believe that we are less than human by the ways that they treat us and the ways that they talk about us. Yeah.
Why is it so important that we understand the impact of dehumanization?
It's important because there's a ripple effect that happens when dehumanization occurs. You know, dehumanization is not a new concept. It may be a word that we are now hearing in the conversations about race and racism, but it's not a new concept. It has existed for generations and has been impacting us for many, many generations. And there are ripple effects that are connected to it. You know, the research tells us that it is traumatizing to live a life in which you constantly feel dehumanized.
Mm-hmm.
And the trauma has real negative impact on our lives. It impacts the ways that we think about ourselves. It
Mm-hmm.
impacts the society around us and the services that we're able to have. It impacts our health and well-being. All of that is affected. And so oftentimes we think about things that we see in society, and we think about them in a bubble, but we don't think about the cycle that occurs that manifests some of the things that we're seeing that's happening. So we look at young people's behavior, for example, but we don't understand the connection between the ways that they were dehumanized and the behavior that shows up. Or we look at people's medical conditions. There's research that tells us that dehumanization is connected to trauma and PTSD, other mental health issues. It's connected to heart health. It's connected to obesity. All of that is connected, and we don't talk about that, have that conversation often enough.
Exactly. And I often talk about the intergenerational deficits that we face, right? Like those things that scientifically are beginning to be proven are like almost like code in our DNA as we continue to bring more and more generations into the world, that we are not just passing on eyes and hair and smiles, but we are also passing along that trauma that lives within us. And in addition to passing it along from a microscopic level, we are then bringing them into the homes that are full of all of that traumatic experience, right? And it colors how we raise our children, and it colors how we respond to all things. I shared, just I tell parents all the time, you can't assign adult connotation to children. They're not thinking the same. And that was a lesson that was not innate in me. It was one that I had to learn. I had to realize that what I was doing was taking all of that pain and that hurt and the world's influence, at 27, 30, 32, and I was assigning it to my children, and they had no idea what I was talking about. And for me, that's one of the biggest sins of dehumanization, because we unknowingly then repeat that to those who we love so much.
Yeah.
And it becomes this dangerous cycle of not seeing ourselves, you as my sister Rhonda, you as a reflection of the work that we do and the spaces that we abide in, as just that person in all of our majesty. And it becomes so crushing.
Yeah.
How did you find yourself in this space? What brought you here?
So there's so many different experiences I've had over the years, but I think one pivotal experience that I had was as a practitioner working in the space of education, right? I started my career in education, running the education department in a Boys and Girls Club,
Mm-hmm.
and beginning to partner with parents to work with the schools to make sure that the kids had what they needed,
Mm-hmm.
and beginning to understand how I was doing real battle with teachers and administrators over Black children because these teachers and administrators did not see the children as worthy. And because of where my Boys and Girls Club was located, many of these parents didn't have the skills to fight those battles themselves. And so we partnered together and they said, I'm giving you permission to be the intermediary to fight on behalf of my kids, right? So understanding things that were happening, like I had a student, for example, who was a straight A student, wanted to go to college, didn't understand the pathway to college, and
Mm-hmm.
his parents had not attended and they didn't understand the pathway either. And I went in and talked to the guidance counselor, and she recommended that he go down to the Department of Labor and sign up for an apprenticeship program because she was making some assumptions and assigning value to his intellect based on who she thought he was because he lived in poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And having to fight for that child and say, you will take your Title I funds and pay his SAT scores. You will take the monies, the public dollars that you've been given, and make sure that he has the assisted trainings that you're supposed to be paying for with these public dollars anyway. You're going to make sure that this child receives it, all the application fees for him to apply to any college he wants to go to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be here to hold you accountable every step of the way. And
Absolutely.
over time, this was happening over and over and over again. I was 23 years old. And I said, this is what this work is all about.
Mm-hmm.
Standing in the gap for young people with folks who are in positions of power, who can assign worth and value to our children in ways that are denying them opportunities and oppressing them and their families.
Yeah. And I always say we are what society would call learned people, right? We are individuals who have acquired knowledge from wherever it is that we've gotten it, and we understand a little more, and it's difficult for us. I can only imagine how lost some parents feel or some individuals feel when they're trying to navigate this system
Mhm.
that's not going to give them the resource, that's not going to give them the information, that deems us unworthy of the step by step needed for things that we're entitled to.
Mhm. And
And
you have to remember, those same parents participated in an education system that dehumanized them.
absolutely.
And so they're living out the trauma that they experienced in their educational experience and now trying to figure out how to advocate for their own child
Mhm.
just a generation later, right?
Yeah.
And what I really came to realize is that every battle that we fight in those hallways is not just for that one child, but it's for every child that comes behind them. Because we have to speak to all of our public systems in a way that says, no more. You will not do this anymore because I will stand up and fight, not just on behalf of my own child or this one child, but all Black children.
Absolutely. And I think that that is the synergy between the Moriah group and Mob United, right?
Yeah.
Because these are the parents who are working third shift. These are the parents who are working second shift. These are the parents who don't make parent teacher conferences and are villainized for it.
Right.
These are the parents who need us the most. They need the help, the explanation, they need the resources the most, because most parents want to see their children succeed.
Absolutely.
You know, we just want a fair shot at having our kiddos be as great as we know that they can be, and to be seen in the same way that we see them.
Yeah.
You touched on it, but I want to delve a little bit deeper into where dehumanization shows up the most. Where do we see that? And what are some of the ways that it shows up that we may not always recognize?
Yeah. It shows up in interpersonal interactions, and then it shows up in systemic ways as well, right? And all of it touches our lives. So I think about, when you go to the store and you're walking down the aisle in the grocery and somebody pushes past you without saying, "Excuse me." And they literally, if you call them on it, they literally say, "Oh, I didn't see you there. How do you not see me? A big whole human being, right? Standing here in this moment." It shows up in the ways that people interact with us and our children. The nasty looks that you get when you try to discipline your child in a moment and tell them that they're doing something that you don't want them to do anymore. It shows up when you go to the schoolhouse and people assume things about you as a parent, right? Oh, you don't care, you don't show up to parenting, the things that you just mentioned. It shows up in the decisions that are made about the investments that happen in our communities. When your city council votes and says, "We're not building that new community center because we don't feel like that investment needs to happen in your community." That's dehumanization. When our children get suspended from school more often than other kids, and not because they are more prone to breaking rules, but because of subjective things, right? That people feel like they can, have the power to make decisions around. All of these are examples of ways that it shows up in our day to day. And some of it we just kind of, "Oh, huh, did that really just happen?" And then some of it is blatant and brazen and in your face, right? And so it's happening in all kinds of ways all around us in society. And we just have to be attuned to it. And I always think that it is important for us to also name it for our kids so that they can understand what they're seeing. And we have an opportunity to undo the negative message that they're receiving in that moment.
Absolutely. I think in yesteryear, right, we learn about the oppressive ways that this country has dehumanized and taken away from our ancestors and our people. And I think 2024, we tend to believe that it's not like that, right? It's not that. And all things evolve, and racism did too.
Yes.
So we now have other ways in which this country has become emboldened, and other avenues that have gone forth to do really the same things that were happening before.
Yeah.
You said unapologetic earlier when you were talking about how we should express ourselves. That's not always safe, though.
It's not.
It's not always safe to be unapologetically me. In fact, I think that's my tagline on LinkedIn: unapologetically me. It takes courage to sit in that place where you use your words to say no more. What are some of the ways we can protect ourselves as we navigate spaces as us, as the whole us, with locks, with shaved sides, and, brown skin, and when we are naming the affront that we are experiencing?
Yeah. It's also a privileged space to sit in, to be able to be unapologetically us, right? Some people don't have that luxury. And I think about the example for with my son when he was attending a school and the school was pressuring him to get involved in athletics and play football. And I recognized that it was only because he was a Black boy, right? And they were pushing him. I had the luxury and the ability to speak up and say no because I was a fully paying parent. But that parent that comes in who's on scholarship feels a pressure, right? You're going to take this money away that now doesn't afford my son the opportunity to have this education, right? And so I also recognize that I sit in a place of privilege that allows me to speak up in ways that some people can't. One of the things that I think is important, though, is for us to be organized to do some of this together. One of the things that I love about the work that you all are doing, there's safety in being able to speak up on these topics together. So it's very different when one parent shows up to say, you all are going to do such and such in this community for our kids. You're going to clean up this park. It's very different when 40 parents get together and say, we are demanding something. It requires time, it requires effort, it requires organizing, but we have to become more civically engaged in our communities in order to move some of this. We have to figure out how we can give voice to the things that we need and speak up as a collective and demand some changes. And it is, I'm not negating the difficulty of that. It is not easy to do. And oftentimes it requires us to like have some training and some people that are coming around to help us with how do we really do this and do this well. But I think that grassroots level of organizing and coming together to speak up and saying that, we are not going to go away. This is something that must be done for our community is really what is going to be essential. And it does have a protective factor to it.
All right, Dr. Rhonda Tsoi-A-Fatt, but I'm tired.
Yeah.
I'm tired. I'm tired of the fight. I am tired of the second and third job that I didn't sign on for. I'm tired of talking in front of the school board. I'm tired of going to city council. I just want peace. And I want it all to go away. And I want my therapy sessions to stop being about my argument with the school principal. I want all of these things to just fall in line. What does the exhausted parent do?
Ooh, that's hard. The exhausted parent, because I've been there. And I was just having a conversation with some parents this weekend about that. When you don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, you don't believe that the change is going to happen. You have to figure out ways that you give each other space to tap out and then tap back in, right? Like, I'm too weary to fight this one fight this week. I need you all to take that. Like, you have to have that collaborative spirit is one piece of it. I think another piece of it is you have to find ways to infuse joy even into these processes, right? You have to find ways to celebrate the small wins that you have achieved together. And you have to find ways to like reinvigorate yourself and continue to reinfuse hope into any process where you're trying to advocate and be active. That's hugely important. And if it is just, okay, we as a group of moms, we're going to get together and we're just going to have like our own little night, those kinds of opportunities for refreshing, and don't turn it into like the gripe session about the very thing that you're tired from, right? Like, let's make this a night about joy and infusing love and peace and music and all of that. And I know that sounds idealistic. I know it does. However, creating those moments, in my experience, is what keeps the movement action going. Those moments of pause where you say, okay, let's celebrate this one little win we got today, and then let's think about tomorrow what we're going to do next. And I think we also have to pay attention to one another and see the tiredness in our sisters, right? And say, I see the burnout creeping up on you, sis. I see that this is taking its toll on you. Let us carry this leg of the race or this piece of the burden.
Right.
But you have to communicate that to one another if you're going to be in the fight together. That's been my experience.
Amen. I love it. And I think your point of celebrating the small wins is huge. And I think of it as a cup I leave out in the rain or a piggy bank. You know, if I come home every day and I put 3 pennies in my piggy bank every day, you know, in a year, it's half full.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have to celebrate those little things that come up. You know, everything is not a big win, but in Mob United, we say all the time, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you've been on this journey for 10 years. We've been on this journey for 8 years. And it really, when we start to accumulate the successes, you really start to see why and the impact that we're having as we continue to go along. I want to talk a little bit about mental health. We know that our mental health is a continuum. You know, it can change minute to minute. It can change day to day. We have to treat our mental health the way we treat our physical health. But dehumanizing behavior is kind of like that faucet that's leaking and it's just kind of tap, tap, tap. It's that rumination, it's that torture around your everyday. Do I say something? Should I say something? Tell us, in your experience, some of the ways that you have seen the effects of dehumanization on an individual's mental health.
You know, I have seen young people who devalue themselves because of the dehumanizing messages that they've been hearing repeatedly. Like you said, that tap, tap, tap on them, right? Young people who, when they were little kids, had big dreams and big aspirations. And by the time they get to 15, 16, they say to me, Miss Rhonda, what's the use? You know, nobody's going to pay attention. Nobody's going to give me a break. And so they have a defeated attitude, and because they're tired, right? I've seen that. I've also seen young people who turn on each other because they begin to drink the Kool-Aid, right? And believe the narrative, you know, that is out there, you know, and do harm to one another because of that. I have seen young people make self-sabotaging decisions. You know, you just gonna believe that I'm not gonna amount to anything anyway, so I might as well drop out of school, or I might as well drink, or I might as well smoke, because that is what you expect of me, because that's what society says that I am, right? We see a lot of that. I've seen kids who have eaten themselves into obesity over, you know, people ridiculing them and treating them poorly, you know, based on the color of their skin or the condition of their family as it's perceived, etc. So it manifests itself in all those different kinds of ways. It goes to the extreme of young people starting to harm themselves because they can't take the pressure of the negative messages, or they can't take the pressure of what they're seeing happening in society. There were so many young people who were so fearful because of what was happening with Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. They were so fearful that they were hurting themselves. You know, all of these are manifestations of how dehumanization is showing up in their lives and them not having the mental space or capacity to process it all in their young minds to figure out a path that says, I reject everything that you're trying to tell me about myself. And they don't have safe spaces to come together to help them to reject those concepts.
Safe spaces. I know as a parent, when I've recognized that my children needed therapy, I've attempted to provide that for them. And I remember searching for a Black male therapist for my son and driving an hour, to meet with that therapist every single week. So an hour there and an hour back, because that's how difficult it was for me to find someone that looked like us to talk with my child. Because in my experience, I would take my child to therapy and the messaging was, you need to take accountability. The messaging was, the issue is you, not them. Here are the things you need to do to fix yourself, And so it became this thing where, in my attempt to find help for my child, that trained person was then adding to the dehumanizing behaviors that they were already experiencing. I don't want to say that every therapist has to be Black or a person of color, but can a therapist that doesn't understand our situation be culturally competent? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah. I think anybody who wants to do this kind of mental health work with us as a people either has to, well, not either, they have to do the work themselves first to understand what dehumanization actually is, to understand what their own implicit bias is currently, where their mindset sits, and to be real with themselves about what learning do they need to do, what do they need to unpack in themselves before they think that they can effectively serve the needs of people of color in that space. And that is not exclusive to white folks, because we as people of color carry our own implicit biases that we have inherited because of the traumas that we have experienced. And we sometimes carry biases based on socioeconomics, based on you're Caribbean, you're not, from here in the Americas, your grandparents were not enslaved, all that kind of stuff. We carry those biases that are also limiting factors in our ability to do this healing work effectively for other people. And so, when I look for a practitioner for my child, those are the kinds of questions that I'm asking too. Have you unpacked this stuff for yourself? How do you define racism, dehumanization, racialized trauma? How do you account for it in the ways that you work with young people? They have to be able to explain all of that.
You touch on a very, very important point. And that point is, when we walk into any practitioner's office, doctor, therapist, attorney, any person that we are looking to do business with on any level and engage with, I think many of us assume they're interviewing us. We assume that they are the expert and we are there to listen. We assume that the letters behind their names means that we don't have a right to question. And I think it's important that we take ownership back of the fact that it's a relationship.
Yes.
And in that relationship, I have a right to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's okay for me to ask, you know, what school you went to. And it's okay for me to ask about whether or not they've done the work. Um, in fact, it's our right to do so.
Yes.
And it's an empowering feeling
Mm-hmm.
to go into a job interview or into a doctor's office and pull out your piece of paper and know exactly what it is that you're interviewing them for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, how do we find those spaces that fit, those workspaces that fit? Um, we live in a society where, you know, you got to be gainfully employed. Bills are high, food is astronomical. I tell people travel is my drug of choice. I want to be someplace right here several times a year. Forget about once a year vacations, several times a year. I want to be someplace else. And to do that, I have to fund my habit.
Mm-hmm.
There are very few spaces that are culturally safe for us.
Yes.
So what do we do when we're looking for work that fits? And when we're in a situation that it may not be the best cultural fit for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's hard. The reason why I created the Moriah group is because I worked in a space where I didn't culturally fit.
Mm.
I worked in a place where, um, despite it being an advocacy organization, I did not feel like I could show up to work as my whole self.
Mm.
I could not speak with authority and with that unapologetic tone about the needs of Black folk in that workspace, right? And I finally got fed up and said, okay, I'm gonna go start my own. um, but for folks that are in the workforce every day and are looking for a place to be, and they're looking for spaces that are culturally affirming, that's a difficult thing because a lot of places pay lip service to it, but when the rubber meets the road, you understand that this is not really a place where I can be my 100% self, right?
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, if there are not enough spaces out there that we've created for ourselves to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I think it's important for everybody to understand that when you're in that moment and in that place where this is not a place that's culturally affirming, that you are mindful about creating outlets for yourself outside of the work environment that are going to be healing and affirming, right? To create spaces for yourself, whether it's with coworkers there who are like-minded with you, or with people outside who may be in your industry, that you create spaces to decompress and to talk about the experiences that you're having. Because you will go crazy if you hold all that inside and just show up to work every day to do the thing, right? And I'm really mindful though, like that this comes out differently if you are, a lawyer than if you are a bus driver.
Right.
And so even if you are a bus driver, you have to have a safe place with friends, colleagues, people who you know and love, where you can talk about and unburden safely what's been going on with you.
Mm.
So if you have a rough day and there was a passenger on there who cussed you out and called you a black you have to have a safe place to go to talk about that and to process that, so that when you go back into your work environment, you're not going back in carrying that and holding all of that. And as a community, we have to create that space for ourselves. Nobody's going to create that for us. And for me, that is why organizations that are run by people of color in our communities are so important, because we as leaders in those spaces recognize what the need is for the mental health and the stability in our community, and we create that. You know, how many times you see churches have a men's group, you know, that gets together, and that is the safe space for those men to get together to talk, or they've got a women's ministry, or the community center down the street has a single mom's night, and everybody comes together and just talks, you know. Find those spaces, and if they don't exist in your community, ask a trusted organization to create it or co-create it with you, because we have to be our own medicine.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Successes. I've said before, I'll say again, I really believe that the US is the only space where Black people continue to experience the level of oppression, the level of dehumanization, the level of fear of specific systems. And it's still asked to thrive. That's still asked to move forward. Stop complaining.
Yeah.
You know, slavery is over. um you got affirmative action. We don't anymore, but you know, you got affirmative action. You know, you have all of these programs. um and you said hope earlier, and it's like it's the dismantling and the snuffing out of hope for me in so many ways. But the chameleon and ever evolving people that we are, so many of us have still managed to succeed. And I'll take it a step further and say that each of us who gets up every day in this world, in this United States, in this society, under the constraints that we're under, is succeeding every day.
Mhm.
Um, how do you see success manifest in the work that you do? And how do we encourage more?
Mm. So for me, in the work that we do every day, success looks like more nonprofit organizations that are led by people of color, that are sitting in our communities, have access to the resources that they need to be that safe healing space for our young people and their parents and their families, right? So the more organizations that I'm able to touch and to bolster and to help them with sustainability, that represents more young people whose lives can be transformed and can be different, because they actually have access to the resources and the supports that they need to disrupt the dehumanization that's happening in their lives every day, right? That's one of the ways. The
Mhm.
other thing that I think about is, how many leaders like you do we get to interface with to talk about opportunities for rest, to talk about opportunities for restoration, to
Mhm.
talk about what does it mean to reinvigorate yourself so that next week you're able to get back out and fight, right?
Mhm.
And so much of what we do, you know, I don't think it's the end game is not like, okay, we've raised $1 million to do this thing over here. The end game is how many families are thriving as a result of what I get up to do every day. And we're just one organization.
Mhm.
There are several other organizations just like ours that exist across the United States.
Mhm.
How many of us are able to really reach down into our communities and to make that impact? That's how I think about success for the work that we do at the Moriah Group every day.
Mhm.
Ultimately, our goal has to be that we transform this society such that dehumanization is no longer a thing.
Right.
That's the ultimate goal. So that racism is not the rule of the day.
Mhm.
So that our young people, when they are 3 years old and they decide, when I grow up, I want to be a dancer.
Mm.
Or when I grow up, I want to be a doctor. When I
Mm.
grow up, I want to be the fire chief. That there is nothing that stands in their way on the path to them getting there. There's no person, there's no system, there's no oppressive narrative that says to them, you'll never be that thing. That's the end goal. That's what we're working towards. And if what I can get up and do every day contributes to that, then I'm making a difference for my people and my community.
Amen. No, that is also my goal. Like when people ask me what the end goal is, my end goal is to change the mission and purpose of MOBB United.
Mm,
To be able to write a whole different mission,
mm,
develop a different purpose, have a different vision,
mm,
and it be done. Um, I read somewhere, don't remember where, but I read somewhere that um, self care is not the cure for exhaustion.
mm,
And I think I'm guilty of that in some ways. Like I shared, travel is my drug of choice. So I'll go see a movie by myself, take myself out to lunch, but it doesn't always make me feel rested.
mhm,
You know, the other side of that is the guilt I feel because I have now taken time that I could have been doing
mhm,
something else. And it is the driving force to not putting it down.
mhm,
In what ways did you have to develop the muscle that gave you permission to put things down and to truly rest
mm,
and to recognize that that wasn't a privilege, that was a right, and
yeah,
it is a necessity?
yeah.
What did you cultivate within yourself?
Mm. It started out of necessity. My body sat me down.
Mm,
And unfortunately, it took a long time for me to listen
mm,
because I would go and go and go and go and do and do and do. And the people need me. I got to, right? And like
mm,
when COVID hit, I went into overdrive. Our communities need this. They need that. We got to give them this. We got to give them that. Till I landed flat on my back in the hospital
mm.
because I worked myself to exhaustion
Wow.
until I got to the point where my immune system was not strong enough to fight off minor infections and they turned into major infections. I was
Wow.
like, okay, I have to do something differently, right?
Mm,
And somebody shared an illustration with me and they were talking about soldiers. And
mm,
they said, no soldier stands guard 24/7.
mm,
They rotate and they have a schedule for a reason because everybody needs the opportunity to rest so that they don't fall asleep on the post. And I really began to understand that me not giving myself opportunities to rest meant that the movement was actually getting less of me
wow. Mhm,
because they were getting a less healed, less alert, less capable form of me because I was not giving myself time to just pause
mhm,
or to do things that reinvigorated me. And so once I learned that lesson, I had to be intentional about infusing it into my day to day. And that's the other thing. Like, rest is not about just taking a trip or just doing a spa day. It is about the daily practices that you put into action that allow you to be rested at the end of any given day so that the next day you can get up completely refreshed to start anew.
And the only thing that I'll add to that is it's not just your body, it is your mind too.
Yes.
It
Yes.
is shutting down your mind, um, and teaching your children to do so.
Yes. Absolutely.
Teaching your children to kind of shut themselves down.
Hmm.
But I want to play devil's advocate for a moment because we're Mob United, right?
Yeah.
And we are moms, we have children,
Mm-hmm.
and if we are not on guard 24/7, who is on guard for our children?
Mm-hmm.
Because you brought up Breonna Taylor, um, and around the same time, a little bit before then, Botham Jean
Mm-hmm.
was also in his apartment. And since then, there have been two other incidents of individuals who have been killed in their homes. And I have to say that that was really dismantling for me,
Mm-hmm.
even in the work that I do. Um, and as horrid as some of these images are, the one place the mama bear in me thought I could keep my children safe
Mm-hmm.
was within my four walls. And those are incidents that took that feeling of safety away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And it changed how I viewed my personal space.
Mm-hmm.
So, what advice do you have for mothers and fathers who don't know how to let go
Yeah.
because of the space that we live in?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll never forget during that season, my son came to me and he said, Mama, we need weapons in the house.
Mm.
We need knives and tasers and guns. And like we need it all. We need to, I need to have something in every room. I need access, you know. And my son is also a black belt in Taekwondo. He
Mm.
was like, we got to fight. And, you know, and in that moment, it was really difficult because I felt his fear in my chest.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I understood because I felt it too,
Mhm.
right? And I had to really take myself through like the mental exercise and the community conversations about how do we not let fear cripple us and grab hold of us in a way that shakes our very foundation.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna be honest with you, the only thing that got me through that was my conversations with my people,
Mm.
you know, and having a community of people that I could say, well, how do you process all of this? And you know, the black man in the group who's a law enforcement person, him giving us some advice.
Mhm.
And then, you know, the sister who has worked in the ER, her giving us some advice. Like that
Mhm.
was the only way that I got through because we will, things are heinous and
Mhm.
we can allow that fear to grab hold of our spirits in a way that has us leading very crippled and limiting lives. And we have to find ways to transcend.
Mhm.
And we have to have spaces in our communities where we can talk it through. Because I need to talk it through so that I can talk it through for my kids.
Mhm.
Because I don't want them living with that crippling fear either. Our kids go through stuff that other children never have to go through. I had to talk my son through wanting to learn how to drive because he said, I never want to drive a car because I never want to get stopped.
Yeah.
I never want to have to endure that experience.
Yeah.
It took a year to
Yeah.
even talk him through that process of not allowing that fear to grab hold of you to the point that you can't live.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's sad because talking through the fear of driving and not allowing it to give you the feeling of not wanting to live, but we know so many of our kiddos really succumb to that and
Yeah,
complete suicide or
yeah.
become a recluse or
Mhm.
never really live up to their full potential because of those experiences. We have about 6 minutes left, and the last thing I want to talk about is our allies.
Mhm.
I never want to give the impression that all things are us against them.
Mhm.
Um, and I never want to give the impression that our pride in who we are and how we present ourselves means that we don't value those who partner with us. But partnering means some specific things.
Yes.
And it means some specific acknowledgments.
Yes.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you see the negotiation between allies who don't necessarily have the same experience but want to occupy our space?
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell folks, you can be an ally, you can work in partnership with us, but you have to enter this from a place of humility.
Mhm.
You have to understand that this is the real lived experiences intergenerationally of our people. And you can be helpful in the ways that we ask you to be helpful, in the ways that we, you know, kind of negotiate and talk about you being helpful, but you cannot lead the narrative. You cannot tell the story. You cannot lead the charge, right? You have to be willing to listen, pay attention, ask questions. And there's a bit of proving that has to happen, right? You have to prove that when it's time to get down and dirty, that you're actually going to stand lockstep with us in advocating for some of these things. Because we've all had experiences where folk will say, I'm down, but they get to a place where they say, okay, this is my stopping point. I'm not down no more. Or I'm gonna injure this relationship over here if I stand with you. So then you really weren't down. You weren't really all about our kids, our families, our communities.
Right.
Because you were like, this is the line that I draw. I can't step over this line here, right? So I mean, honestly, like I take people through some testing. I need to see proof, that you really are wanting to stand strong in this, that you really actually believe this, that you're really going to go to bat alongside us, and that you're going to do it from a place of understanding that we hold our stories.
Absolutely. And a place of a place that's not this fragility.
Right.
This space that says I have to now change who I am because I am trying to preserve something in you, because
Right.
then we end up in the same place we started.
Yeah. No, got time for that. Mm-mm.
So I'm going to give you last words, but Dr. Rhonda Tsoi-A-Fatt from the Moriah Group, it really has been a pleasure. Um, Dehumanization, like you said, is not a new term. It is something that has existed, that more people are now talking about. Um, and I encourage everyone to learn more, because if we understand what it is, then we are less willing to accept it
Mm-hmm.
when it's standing in front of us.
Yes.
Um, Tell us again how we can reach out to you, the work that you're doing, drop your links, all that good stuff.
Yes. So folks can find out about all of the work we're doing on our website, themoriahgroup.com. And from there, it leads you to all the other websites for all the other projects that we're working on. But you can also follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube as well. We have lots of videos about dehumanization that people can watch to learn. We also have a framework document that people can download and they can read if that's their preferred mode of learning, to learn about dehumanization and its impacts. I do want to stress and highlight there are tons of great organizations that we partner with across this country who are working to disrupt dehumanization every day in terms of the way young people feel about themselves, their access to great services in their community, their ability to get a strong education, et cetera. I encourage you to learn about those organizations by going on our website, themoriahgroup.com or forwardpromise.org, to learn about the work that those organizations are doing and to even reach out to them and say, we really want to create something like that in our hometown. What can you teach us? What can you share with us? Because this work is only going to happen well if all of us are partnering together to grow it from the grassroots up.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Really appreciate you. Looking forward to seeing you in December. Woo!
Yes,
Yes, I am so looking forward to seeing you in December. Thank you again for all of the work that you're doing within the community and for being a resource to everyone around you. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.
thank you.